The first shot isn't the gun, it's the silence before it. A hospital corridor at 2017 a.m., lights humming, the smell of antiseptic and burned coffee in the air. Dr. Evelyn Cross stands alone at the end of the hall, her hand trembling over a patient file that shouldn't exist. She hears footsteps behind her. Slow, measured. Not a nurse, not security. And when the gunshot finally cracks through the building, it doesn't echo. It swallows everything. 3 hours earlier, Evelyn was finishing a double shift in the trauma unit, her scrubs stiff with dried blood that wasn't hers. Mercy General had a reputation best emergency response in the state, worst funding in the city, peeling paint, overworked staff, a board of directors who cared more about donors than patients. But Evelyn stayed. She always stayed, because years ago, this hospital saved her little brother after a drunk driver left him broken on asphalt. Mercy gave her family hope when there was none. She owed it everything. Except tonight, something felt wrong. It started with a patient who wasn't on the schedule. Male, mid-40s, no ID. Brought in by private ambulance, not city EMS. 2 men in tailored suits hovered as he was rushed into surgery, their eyes too calm for a man bleeding out. Evelyn caught a glimpse of the wound-clean entry, professional, not a random act of violence. Someone wanted this man dead, and someone else wanted him alive. When she asked for his name, one of the suited men smiled without warmth. "Just save him, doctor." The way he said it, it wasn't a request. Surgery lasted 2 hours. Bullet lodged near the spine. One wrong move, and he'd never walk again. Her hands were steady, but her mind wasn't. She could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes. When the heart monitor flatlined for 3 terrifying seconds, the room went cold. She pressed harder. "Come on," she whispered under her breath. Not to the patient. To herself. "I am not losing him. Not like before." The line spiked back to life. Breath returned. Crisis averted. On the surface. Afterward, while the others cleaned up, Evelyn noticed something that tightened her chest. The patient's chart had no digital record, no insurance, no emergency contact, just a temporary file with a red sticker she'd never seen before. She peeled it back. Beneath it, another name. Daniel Voss. The name hit her like a physical blow. Because Daniel Voss was the investigative journalist who disappeared 6 months ago after promising to expose corruption inside Mercy General. Her stomach dropped. She remembered his face from the news, the press conferences, his sister begging for information, the police calling it a cold case. And now he was here, shot, hidden under an alias, protected by men who didn't belong in a public hospital. Evelyn felt the walls closing in. If Voss was alive, then the story he was chasing hadn't died with him. It was breathing, bleeding, and somehow she was standing in the middle of it. That's when the power flickered. Just once. Enough to make everyone look up. The backup generator kicked in with a groan. A nurse laughed nervously. "Old building," she muttered. But Evelyn noticed the suited men had vanished from outside the operating room. No goodbye, no instructions, just gone. She stepped into the corridor, the air colder now, heavier. Down the hall, near the ICU doors, she saw one of them speaking urgently into a phone, his voice low, controlled. Then he looked up, and their eyes met. He didn't look away. A chill crawled up her spine. He ended the call and walked toward her, each step unhurried, confident. "Dr. Cross," he said, reading her badge. "You did excellent work tonight." His tone was smooth, almost kind. That made it worse. "Mr. Voss's survival is critical." A pause. Not medical, strategic. For everyone. He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, for a small silver keycard. He pressed it into her palm. "There's a secure wing on Sub-Level 3, authorized personnel only. You'll be overseeing his recovery there." Sub-Level 3 didn't exist. Mercy General had 2 basement floors, storage and maintenance. Everyone knew that. Evelyn opened her mouth to question him, but the overhead lights buzzed again, louder this time. For a split second, everything went dark. Total blackout. No hum, no machines, no breathing sounds from distant rooms. Silence. When the lights snapped back on, the man was gone, the hallway empty, as if he'd never been there, but the keycard was still in her hand, cold against her skin. And at the far end of the corridor, she saw something that made her pulse hammer in her ears. 2 armed men in tactical gear were wheeling Daniel Voss's unconscious body toward the elevator marked Service Access Only, not toward ICU. Down. And somehow, without anyone saying it out loud, Evelyn understood one terrifying truth. If she followed them, her life would never be the same again. The elevator doors slid open with a metallic sigh. They looked at her, waiting. The elevator shouldn't have moved. Mercy General's service lift had been broken for months. Everyone knew that. But the doors slid open like a mouth exhaling secrets, and the armed men wheeled Daniel Voss inside. Evelyn's feet stayed frozen to the tile. Every instinct screamed to walk away. Report it. Pretend she saw nothing. But then Voss's hand twitched on the gurney, just once, as if reaching for something in a dream, or someone. And before she could stop herself, she stepped in. The doors sealed shut with a heavy clang. No buttons, no floor indicator, just a keycard panel glowing faint blue. One of the tactical men nodded toward her hand. "Use it." His voice was filtered through a mask, flat and mechanical. Evelyn hesitated, then slid the silver card through the reader. A soft beep. The elevator lurched, not down smoothly but deeper than gravity should allow. Her stomach flipped. This isn't possible. Mercy only has 2 basements. Yet the hum beneath her feet told a different story. The descent felt endless. No music, no chatter. Just the slow mechanical grind and the steady beep of Voss's portable monitor. Evelyn stared at his face. Pale. Bruised. A faint scar near his temple she remembered from his TV appearances. 6 months missing, officially presumed dead, and now hidden beneath the very hospital he accused of corruption. Her pulse pounded in her ears. If the board knew he was alive, why hide him? And if they didn't, who was funding this? The elevator jolted to a stop. The doors opened to a corridor, nothing like the crumbling hospital upstairs. Bright white floors, reinforced steel walls, cameras in every corner. The air smelled different, sterile, expensive, controlled. A private facility buried beneath a public one. A lie under a lie. As they pushed Voss down the hall, Evelyn caught sight of rooms lined with frosted glass. Inside, silhouettes moved. Patients? Prisoners? She couldn't tell. One figure slammed a hand against the glass as she passed. The sound was muffled, desperate. They stopped at a sealed room marked only with a number, 0317. Inside, the equipment was state-of-the-art. Monitors she'd only seen at medical conferences. Surgical tools arranged with obsessive precision. This wasn't emergency care. This was containment. The armed men transferred Voss onto the bed and stepped back. Another man entered. No mask this time. Gray suit. Silver hair. Calm eyes that had never known panic. "Dr. Cross," he said gently, "welcome to Sublevel 3. Her throat tightened. "This floor isn't on any blueprint." He smiled faintly. "That's the point." He explained it as if discussing a research grant. Mercy had a private division. Experimental treatments. High-value individuals. People too important or too dangerous for public records. Voss, he said, had uncovered fragments of it. Sensitive information. International partnerships. Financial pipelines. He misunderstood what he found, the man added smoothly. "We are saving lives the world cannot afford to lose. By shooting journalists?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. His expression didn't change. "He was intercepted by parties who don't share our vision. We retrieved him. You saved him." A pause. Heavy. "Now you will help us stabilize him until he can be properly debriefed." Debriefed. The word landed like a threat. Evelyn looked at Voss, unconscious and vulnerable under harsh white lights. Protective instinct flared in her chest. Whatever he discovered had gotten him nearly killed. And now he was trapped in a secret medical prison beneath the hospital she loved. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly. The suited man stepped closer. Not aggressive, just certain. "Your student loans disappear. Your brother's ongoing physical therapy fully funded. Grants for the trauma unit. Mercy thrives." He tilted his head slightly. "Or we can make your position here complicated." There it was, the velvet-covered blade. Silence stretched between them. Evelyn felt the weight of every choice she'd ever made pressing down on her ribs. She thought about her brother learning to walk again, about the underpaid nurses upstairs, about the cracked ceiling tiles in pediatric oncology. How many lives could this hidden funding save? And at what cost? Behind her, a monitor suddenly spiked. Voss's eyes snapped open. Not confused, not groggy, aware. He locked onto Evelyn as if he'd been waiting for her specifically. His lips parted, dry and trembling. The suited man turned, startled for the first time, and Voss whispered two words that drained the blood from her face. "They're lying." Alarms began to pulse softly in the room, not emergency alarms. Containment protocols activating. The doors sealed with a hiss. Red lights flickered above the frame. The man in the gray suit didn't look at Voss, he looked at Evelyn. "Doctor," he said calmly, though something sharp flickered behind his eyes, "I suggest you sedate the patient, now." Her hand hovered over the syringe tray. Voss's fingers twitched, reaching weakly toward her coat sleeve. "Trust me, or don't." Evelyn's hand didn't move. The syringe hovered inches above Daniel Voss's IV line, clear liquid trembling inside the barrel. Around her, red containment lights pulsed in slow, suffocating rhythm. The suited man's calm expression hardened just slightly. Not panic. Control recalibrating. "Doctor," he repeated, softer now. "Sedate him." Voss's fingers tightened weakly around her sleeve. His eyes, sharp despite the pain, never left hers. "Sub-level isn't for treatment," he rasped, each word scraped out of a dry throat. "It's extraction." The word hit like ice water. Evelyn swallowed. Extraction of what? But the gray-suited man stepped forward. "Enough." He gestured to the tactical guards. "Restrain the patient." They moved fast. That's when Evelyn made her choice. She pivoted, not toward Voss, but toward the heart monitor. Her elbow slammed into it, sending the machine crashing to the floor in a burst of sparks. The room erupted in shrill alarms, real ones this time. The guards hesitated, instinctively turning toward the malfunction. In that half-second of chaos, she jammed the syringe into the IV port. Not the sedative. Adrenaline. Voss's body jolted. His breath hitched violently as his pulse surged. "Run," she whispered. The gray-suited man's composure cracked. "Seal the exits." Too late. Voss tore the oxygen line free and rolled off the bed, collapsing hard onto the polished floor. Pain flashed across his face, but he forced himself up, gripping the side rail. Evelyn grabbed his arm and pulled. "Can you walk?" "Not well," he shot back. "Good enough." They stumbled into the corridor as security shutters began sliding down at both ends with heavy metallic groans. The white hallway that once felt pristine now felt like a trap snapping shut. Behind them, boots pounded. Gunfire cracked. The sound was deafening in the narrow corridor. A bullet ricocheted off steel, showering sparks. Evelyn ducked, dragging Voss toward a side door she'd noticed earlier, the one with no label. She slammed her shoulder into it. Locked. Keycard, Voss gasped. Her hands shook as she yanked the silver card from her pocket and swiped. For one horrifying second, nothing happened. Then, green light. They fell inside just as another shot blasted through the wall behind them. The door sealed automatically. Darkness. Not the sterile white glow from before. This room was different. Dim. Concrete walls. The air smelled metallic and something else. Rust. Old blood. Emergency lights flickered on overhead, revealing rows of medical chairs bolted to the floor, straps hanging from armrests, IV stands beside each one. Along the far wall, refrigerated units hummed steadily. Voss stared at them, chest heaving. "They don't save high-value patients down here," he said. "They harvest them." Evelyn's stomach turned. Harvest? Stem cells, organs, experimental neural mapping. Wealthy clients pay for miracle cures. Sublevel. 3 supplies them. His voice trembled, not from weakness, from fury. They fake deaths. Bring people here. Off the grid. Her mind raced. Her mind raced. The missing persons reports. The unexplained donor funding. The sudden recovery of certain political figures from terminal illnesses. Pieces clicked together in sickening clarity. Footsteps echoed outside. Closer. "They can't let us reach the surface," Voss said urgently. "If this gets out—" "It will," she snapped, though fear tightened her throat. "I won't let this continue." But here's the thing. She wasn't just risking her career anymore, or her safety. If Mercy's board was involved, if international money flowed through this place, then exposing it meant war. Powerful enemies. Endless reach. A loud bang slammed against the sealed door. Metal dented inward. Again. The emergency lights flickered violently. One of the refrigerated units beeped as its seal loosened slightly from the vibration. The door cracked open an inch. Inside, a hand. Pale. Still. Tagged. Evelyn froze. The toe tag read a name she recognized instantly. Councilman Robert Hale, declared dead 2 months ago from heart failure. Except his chest was rising. Slowly. "He's alive," she whispered. Voss nodded grimly. "Barely. They keep them sedated until extraction day." Another impact shook the room. The door frame began to split. Voss grabbed her shoulders. "There's a maintenance tunnel behind those freezers. I mapped part of this place before they caught me. It leads to an old elevator shaft. And then? And then we climb." Gunfire blasted through the weakening door. A bullet tore past her ear, embedding into concrete. The sound was thunder in a coffin. No more hesitation. They shoved against the refrigeration unit together, muscles screaming, metal screeching across the floor. The gap behind it revealed a narrow black tunnel sloping upward. The door finally buckled. Armed guards flooded in. Evelyn grabbed Voss's hand and dove into the darkness just as gunfire lit the room behind them. The tunnel swallowed them whole. Pitch black. Breathing hard, crawling toward a surface that suddenly felt impossibly far away. And somewhere above them, in the polished offices of Mercy General, someone was already erasing Dr. Evelyn Cross from existence. The tunnel is barely wide enough to breathe. Concrete scrapes. Evelyn's palms as she crawls, knees slamming against damp stone. Behind them, gunfire thunders into the dark, flashes of light snapping through the narrow passage. Dust rains down. Voss coughs hard beside her, every movement costing him. "Left turn ahead," he whispers, voice raw. Then incline. "How far?" she asks. "Farther than I made it last time. Last time." The words hit heavy. He's been here before. Trapped. Studied, almost erased. The tunnel angles upward sharply, forcing them to climb more than crawl. Voss slips, biting back a cry as his healing wound tears open beneath the bandages. Evelyn grabs him under the arm, hauling him forward with a strength she didn't know she had. Fear does that. It burns through doubt, turns hesitation into fuel. Behind them, shouting. They've entered the tunnel. Flashlights slice through darkness. "They'll split up," Voss pants. One team circles back to surface exits. They'll lock down the hospital. Her hospital. Her brother is scheduled for therapy there tomorrow morning. A new fear punches through her ribs. If Mercy erases her, what happens to him? To anyone connected to her? The gray-suited man didn't seem like someone who leaves loose ends breathing. The tunnel opens suddenly into a vertical shaft. Cold air rushes down from somewhere above. Faint, real, freedom. An old maintenance ladder runs up the side, rust flaking under Evelyn's grip as she tests it. It groans in protest. 50 feet up, a faint square of darker black suggests a hatch. "We climb," she says. Voss looks at the ladder, then at his trembling hands. If I fall, you won't. She goes first, testing each rung before shifting her weight. The metal bites into her palms. Halfway up, a gunshot echoes below, louder now. A bullet slams into the shaft wall, spraying concrete chips. They're at the base, Voss shouts. Faster. Her arms scream. Muscles burn. Muscles burn. She forces herself upward, rung after rung, breath coming in sharp gasps. Don't look down. Don't think. Just climb. A beam of light hits her foot. Another shot. The ladder jerks violently as a bullet snaps through one of the lower bolts. Rusted metal shrieks. Voss climbs faster, ignoring the pain tearing through him. Almost there, she yells. She slams her shoulder into the hatch. It doesn't move. Locked. Of course it's locked. Below, one of the tactical guards starts climbing. Efficient. Relentless. Gaining. Evelyn claws at the hatch, fingers scraping metal edges until skin splits. There has to be a release. Voss reaches her level, breath ragged. Step aside. With what? You can barely. Trust me. He pulls something from inside his torn hospital gown. A small data drive, taped against his ribs beneath the bandage. He wedges it into a narrow panel beside the hatch, one she hadn't even noticed in the dark. A soft beep. The hatch unlocks. You hacked a maintenance exit? She stares. I told you, he gasps. I mapped this place. The hatch swings open to a blast of cold night air. They spill out onto a rooftop, not Mercy's main roof. An adjacent building connected by old service infrastructure. Wind howls around them, city lights blinking in the distance like indifferent stars. For a split second, relief floods her system. Then she sees the red and blue lights below. Police cruisers. Ambulances. The hospital is already in lockdown. Voss staggers to the roof's edge, peering down. That was fast. Too fast. Evelyn's stomach sinks. They called it in. Framed them. She spots security personnel at the hospital entrance speaking urgently to officers. One of the tactical guards from below emerges through a side access door across the rooftop, weapon raised. No hesitation. He fires. Concrete explodes near Voss's feet. Evelyn tackles him behind a ventilation unit. Her heart slams so hard she can hear it in her skull. We can't go down there, she says. They'll arrest us. Or worse. They'll claim I kidnapped you, Voss replies grimly. Or that you went rogue. The narrative is already written. Another shot ricochets off metal inches from her head. The guard advances slowly, methodical, herding them toward the roof's edge. There's nowhere left to run. Except. Voss looks across the gap between buildings. 5 feet, maybe 6. A drop of 8 stories below. You can't be serious, she breathes. We don't have a choice. The guard steps closer. Hands where I can see them, he shouts. Police sirens wail louder below. Time fractures. Evelyn looks at the gap, at the street far beneath, at Voss, barely standing but burning with defiance. Everything she believed about her hospital is ash now. Everything safe is gone. On 3, Voss says. A bullet grazes her shoulder, hot and blinding. 1. The guard steadies his aim. 2. Evelyn grabs Voss's hand, locking her fingers into his. 3. They run, and leap into the night. Air swallows them. For one suspended second, Evelyn feels nothing. No pain, no fear, just the violent rush of wind ripping a scream from her lungs. Then her shoes slam against the opposite ledge. Her fingers claw at concrete. She slips. Voss catches her wrist. His injured arm buckles, but he holds on, teeth clenched, muscles trembling as 8 stories of empty space pull at her legs. Kick up! He shouts. She swings hard, scraping her knee raw against the wall, and hooks her elbow over the edge. Together, shaking, they drag themselves onto the rooftop just as another gunshot cracks behind them. The bullet chips the ledge inches from Voss's head. No time. They scramble toward a rusted stairwell door. Locked. Of course it's locked. Evelyn smashes the narrow window with a loose brick, reaches through shattered glass, and shoves the handle down. Pain slices across her palm, warm blood mixing with cold air. Inside, the stairwell smells like mold and old cigarettes. They race downward, footsteps echoing in frantic rhythm. Sirens wail closer. But something's wrong. Too many sirens. Through a grimy window between floors, Evelyn glimpses flashing lights not just at Mercy, but around the entire block. Police cruisers forming a perimeter. Tactical vans. News helicopters already circling. They're controlling the narrative, Voss says between breaths. They'll call it a terror threat. Lock the city down. On the 4th floor landing, the exit door bursts open below them. Boots pound upward. They anticipated the jump, Evelyn whispers. Voss nods grimly. They always anticipate. They spin and push through a random office floor instead. Dark cubicles, abandoned desks, the stale scent of carpet cleaner. Emergency alerts buzz on computer screens left in sleep mode. CITY. A Devasory. Armed C-Specs. At Mercy General. Her face flashes briefly on one of the muted news feeds mounted near reception. A security still? Blurry, but unmistakable. Dr. Evelyn Cross. Armed and dangerous. Her breath leaves her in a hollow rush. They're framing us already. They've been preparing for that since the moment I woke up. Gunshots explode through the stairwell door behind them. Drywall erupts near her shoulder. They sprint through cubicle rows as bullets tear through fabric partitions like paper. At the far end of the office, a maintenance elevator sits half open, service lights flickering. Evelyn slams the button. Nothing. Manual override, Voss says, rushing to the panel. His fingers move fast despite the tremor. He pries it open, exposing wiring. If they cut public access, this might still connect too. The wall behind them splinters as rounds punch through. "Daniel!" she shouts. 2 seconds. The elevator jerks to life with a grinding scream. They dive inside just as armed figures flood the office. The doors crawl shut, agonizingly slow. A guard lunges forward, firing. A bullet pierces Voss's side just as the doors seal completely. The elevator drops, not down gently. Freefall. Evelyn slams against the wall as gravity disappears. Voss collapses beside her, blood spreading fast through his torn gown. "Daniel!" He forces a tight smile through clenched teeth. "Guess they found the manual cutoff." The elevator plummets 3 floors before emergency brakes shriek and snap into place. The cabin jerks violently, then hangs suspended in darkness between levels. Total silence, except for Voss's breathing. Wet. Uneven. Evelyn presses her hands against his wound, blood warm and slick between her fingers. "Stay with me. Stay with me." Above them, faint metallic clanging echoes through the shaft. "They're climbing down," he whispers. Her mind races. No exit doors accessible. No exit doors accessible. No signal underground. No weapons. Just a dying journalist and a suspended box. Then Voss grips her wrist weakly. "The drive," he murmurs. "The one you used upstairs?" He nods. "It's not just access codes. It's evidence. Financial transfers. Client lists. Names that'll burn governments." His eyes lock onto hers, fierce despite the pain. "If I don't make it?" "Don't," she snaps, voice breaking. "Listen to me." He coughs, blood touching his lips. "There's one person I didn't tell them about. An independent reporter, off-grid. She's been waiting for proof." He swallows hard. "Her name is Mara Kessler." Metal screeches above. Closer now. "How do I find her?" Evelyn asks urgently. "She'll find you," he says faintly. "Once this goes live?" "What goes live?" He gives her the faintest grin. "I set a dead man's trigger." Her heart stops. If my biometrics flatline for more than 60 seconds, the drive uploads automatically. Footsteps clang directly above the elevator roof. "They're here," she whispers. Voss's breathing stutters. The guards begin cutting through the top hatch, and Evelyn realizes the horrifying truth. If he dies, the truth explodes into the world. If he lives, mercy buries it forever. The metal above them tears open. A flashlight beam pierces the darkness. "Found them!" Evelyn looks down at Voss. His pulse is fading beneath her fingers. And for the first time in her life, saving a patient might doom them all. Metal screams as the hatch above them rips open. A blinding flashlight beam floods the elevator car. "Step away from him," a voice commands. Boots slam onto the roof, then a rifle barrel lowers through the jagged opening, steady and certain. Evelyn doesn't move. Her hands are still pressed against Voss's wound, feeling his pulse stutter like a dying engine. 58 seconds without stability and his dead man's trigger activates. The truth detonates across the world. Names, clients, governments, chaos, or silence. "Dr. Cross," another voice calls down, calm, amplified through a small speaker. The gray-suited man. "Of course, you're a healer. Don't let him martyr himself. Save him. We can still resolve this quietly." Quietly. Blood pools beneath her knees. Voss's eyes flutter, unfocused now. "Don't let them," he breathes. The rifle cocks. Last warning. Time fractures. Last warning. Time fractures. Evelyn's entire life has been about preservation. Stabilize. Repair. Prevent loss. But Sublevel 3 wasn't preservation. It was selective salvation. The wealthy breathe. The inconvenient disappear. Her brother's face flashes in her mind. learning to walk again, smiling through pain. Mercy helped him. Mercy also built a slaughterhouse underground. 60 seconds. Voss's pulse slips beneath her fingers. The guard drops into the elevator car with a heavy thud, weapon trained on her chest. Another follows. Hands up! Instead, she moves, not toward the guards, toward the wound. She presses harder, deliberately, directly against the torn artery. Voss gasps sharply, eyes flying open in shock. Pain spikes his heart rate for one violent second. Then it flatlines. The monitor on his portable unit gives a long, unbroken tone. The guards freeze. Evelyn stares at the lifeless line, tears blurring her vision. 59. 60. Somewhere far above the city, encrypted servers recognize the signal. Upload initiated. The gray-suited man's voice snaps through the speaker. What did you do? Evelyn slowly lifts her blood-covered hands. I tried to save him. A tremor runs through the building, not physical, digital. Sirens outside shift pitch as police radios crackle with sudden confusion. On the guard's wrist tablet, notifications begin exploding across the screen. Data breach detect. Financial leak in progress. Global distribution. Active. No, 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 the guard mutters. The elevator lights flicker as systems reroute power. News alerts ignite across phones citywide. Helicopters overhead pivot instantly, not toward Mercy's press entrance, but toward the board's private wing. Voss's body lies still for 3 unbearable seconds. Then he inhales sharply. The guards stare. Evelyn had counted. She'd compressed the artery just long enough to stop measurable flow, long enough to trigger the biometric failsafe, but not long enough for irreversible damage. His pulse returns beneath her fingers. Weak, but alive. The gray-suited man's calm finally shatters. Terminate them. Now! The guard raises his rifle. Gunfire erupts from above. Not theirs. The second guard jerks backward, dropping instantly. The first spins toward the hatch just as another shot rings out, precise and controlled. He collapses beside his partner. Silence. Then a woman's voice from above. Clear. Steady. Dr. Cross, I really hope that's you. Evelyn looks up. A silhouette stands framed against the shaft's opening. Short hair, tactical jacket, press badge clipped to her belt like a badge of war. Mara Kessler, the woman says. You just broke the biggest story of the decade. Voss coughs weakly. Took you long enough. Mara smirks. You always were dramatic. She tosses down a rope ladder. We have about 90 seconds before federal agents storm this building. Some to bury this, some to save themselves. Either way, you don't want to be here. Above them, the city roars with a different energy now. Not containment. Exposure. Mercy's board members are being dragged from offices. Financial accounts frozen in real time. Politicians scrambling in live broadcasts as documents flood every major outlet simultaneously. Sublevel 3 is no longer a secret. Evelyn helps Voss onto the ladder, ignoring the fire in her muscles. As they climb, she hears sirens shifting again. This time, not converging to silence a threat, but responding to one exposed. They emerge onto the street through a maintenance access across the block. Chaos reigns. Reporters shouting, officers arguing, screens everywhere flashing, leaked documents. Mara grips Evelyn's shoulder. You understand what you just did, right? Evelyn looks back at Mercy General, at the glowing windows that once symbolized hope. I ended it, she says quietly. Mara studies her. No, you started something. Across the street, federal agents push through the crowd toward them. Not all of them look friendly. Voss leans heavily against Evelyn. There's more, he whispers. Sublevel 3 wasn't the top. It was a prototype. Her heart sinks. Prototype for what? He meets her eyes, deadly serious. For a network. Sirens swell again, louder, closer. And this time, they're coming for everyone. Morning doesn't arrive gently. It explodes. By sunrise, Mercy General is no longer a hospital. It's a crime scene wrapped in satellite trucks and flashing lights. Federal agents swarm the entrances. Board members are escorted out in handcuffs, their polished confidence shattered under the weight of leaked transactions scrolling across every screen in America. Words like organ trafficking, illegal experimentation, black market transplants dominate headlines before breakfast. Evelyn sits on the back step of an unmarked federal vehicle, dried blood stiff on her hands. Across from her, Daniel Voss is strapped to a stretcher, oxygen mask in place, alive because she chose to let him die first. Paramedics work quickly but gently now. Different tone. Different chain of command. Mara stands nearby, phone pressed to her ear, orchestrating the storm she helped unleash. Yes, release the second data batch, she says calmly. Names. All of them. She glances at Evelyn. No more shadows. But here's the thing. Exposure doesn't equal safety. Two black SUVs idle at the edge of the chaos. Tinted windows. Government plates. Not FBI. Not local law enforcement. The kind of vehicles that don't answer to press conferences. Voss notices them too. Prototype, Evelyn says quietly, the words still echoing from hours ago. He pulls the oxygen mask aside briefly. Sub-level 3 was proof of concept. A controlled environment, wealthy buyers, disposable donors. His jaw tightens. The real network operates offshore. Mobile facilities, international waters, untouchable. A chill crawls up her spine. And the leak? Hurts them, he says. Doesn't kill them. One of the black SUV's doors opens. A woman steps out in a dark tailored coat. Movements precise, expression unreadable. She approaches without hurry, weaving through agents who don't try to stop her. That's what terrifies Evelyn. The woman stops a few feet away. Dr. Cross, Mr. Voss. Her voice is smooth, controlled. I represent a department that doesn't officially exist. Mara steps forward instantly. They're not going anywhere without counsel. The woman's eyes flick to Mara's press badge. Miss Kessler, your upload has already triggered international incidents. Embassies are calling emergency sessions as we speak. A faint smile. You've done remarkable damage. Truth isn't damage, Mara shoots back. The woman ignores her, focusing on Evelyn. You exposed one node. Congratulations. But the network adapts. It always has. She leans slightly closer. What you found under mercy was charity compared to what's coming. Evelyn feels it then, not fear, resolve. You knew, she says. The woman doesn't confirm, doesn't deny. We monitor threats to national stability. Sudden medical collapses among powerful individuals create instability. Solutions are required. By harvesting people? Evelyn's voice cracks with fury. By preserving influence, the woman corrects coolly. You saved a journalist and ignited outrage. Admirable. But outrage fades. Power reorganizes. Behind them, agents load boxes of seized documents into trucks. Cameras zoom in. Reporters shout questions no one answers. Voss pushes himself upright despite the pain. If you're here to silence us, you're too late. The woman studies him carefully. Silence is inefficient now. Cooperation, however, she gestures subtly toward the SUVs. There are larger players than Mercy. Help us dismantle them properly. Properly? Mara laughs bitterly. You mean quietly? Strategically, the woman replies. Evelyn looks at Mercy General one last time. The building that saved her brother. The building that buried the vulnerable beneath it. She feels something inside her shift, not shatter. Transform. All her life she believed healing meant protecting institutions that saved lives. Now she understands. Sometimes healing means cutting out infection, even if it's systemic. She steps away from the SUV. I'm not working in the dark anymore, she says firmly. If there's a network, we expose it the same way. White. All of it. The woman's expression tightens for the first time. That would destabilize governments. Then maybe they should be destabilized. Silence hangs between them. Finally, the woman nods once. You've made yourself very difficult to eliminate, Doctor. A pause. That can be useful. She returns to the SUV without another word. The vehicles pull away, disappearing into morning traffic. Mara exhales slowly. You just turned down unofficial immunity. Evelyn watches the sun rise over the city skyline, light washing over glass towers and crowded streets. No, she says softly. I chose accountability. Voss manages a faint smile. You realize this doesn't end here. I know. Across the street, strangers are already lighting candles for the missing names revealed overnight. Families clutch photos. Hope mixes with grief in the cool morning air. Evelyn stands, shoulders squared. Mercy fell, but the network still breathes. And this time, she's not just a doctor, she's a witness. In 2026, Mercy arrives not as a quiet character drama or a disposable streaming thriller, but as a high-concept collision between star power and moral tension. At the center of it all stands Chris Pratt, an actor whose career has been defined by charm, physicality, and franchise dominance, stepping into darker, more ethically ambiguous territory. Directed by Timur Bekmambetov, a filmmaker known for kinetic visual language and stylized action worlds, Mercy signals an intriguing creative pivot for both men. One built his reputation on elastic, wisecracking heroes. The other built his on operatic chaos. Together, they aim for something colder, tighter, more intimate. Bekmambetov's career has never been predictable. From the visually audacious Night Watch and Day Watch in Russia to Hollywood's bullet-bending spectacle Wanted, he has consistently gravitated toward heightened realities and moral extremities. Even his experimental screen-life productions films unfolding entirely on computer screens reveal a fascination with how modern technology reshapes human behavior. He isn't interested in static drama. He likes momentum. With Mercy, however, the scale shifts. Instead of sprawling supernatural wars or gravity-defying assassins, the story locks into a near-future America where capital punishment has evolved into something disturbingly efficient. The premise alone carries weight. Society has streamlined the death penalty into a mechanized process, and Pratt's character, a detective, finds himself accused of a violent crime. The clock is merciless. Execution looms. The system moves faster than truth. That concept speaks directly to Bekmambetov's long-standing thematic obsession with institutions versus individuals. In Wanted, it was a secret society manipulating fate. Here, it's bureaucracy weaponized through technology. Same philosophical core, different battlefield. What makes this project especially compelling is how it reframes Pratt. For over a decade, he's been Hollywood's affable rogue, Guardians of the Galaxy, Jurassic World, characters built on humor layered over heroism. Audiences trust him instinctively. Bekmambetov appears to leverage that trust strategically. Casting a performer associated with likability inside a story about alleged guilt creates friction before the first scene even unfolds. Are we watching a wronged man, or someone whose charm masks something darker? That ambiguity becomes part of the film's psychological architecture. The creative genesis of Mercy also reflects Hollywood's current fascination with near-future cautionary tales. Post-2020 cinema has leaned heavily into stories about institutional overreach, technological acceleration, and moral shortcuts disguised as efficiency. Bekmambetov's decision to set the film just beyond the present, close enough to feel plausible, grounds the speculative elements in discomfort. There are no flying cars or dystopian wastelands, just systems evolving in ways that feel one legislative vote away from reality. That proximity matters. It turns genre into warning. Production backing plays its own role in shaping the film's DNA. Developed under a studio banner known for mid-budget thrillers rather than tentpole excess, Mercy avoids the bloat that sometimes dilutes high-concept sci-fi. The budget, while not publicly extravagant, appears calibrated for tension rather than spectacle. Confined environments. Stark procedural settings. Technology presented with clinical realism rather than glossy futurism. Bekmambetov thrives when visual flair collides with narrative urgency, and here he seems to channel that energy into precision instead of maximalism. And here's where the director's signature becomes crucial. Bekmambetov rarely shoots morality as binary. His worlds operate in gradients, loyalty tangled with betrayal, justice entangled with cruelty. A story about mechanized execution practically begs for visual metaphor. Expect sterile corridors bathed in unforgiving light, surveillance framing that traps characters within digital grids, camera movement that mirrors the tightening grip of inevitability. If Wanted was chaos stylized into ballet, Mercy looks poised to stylize inevitability into dread. But beneath the high-concept scaffolding lies something more personal. Bekmambetov has often spoken about power structures. Who controls them? Who suffers under them? In a film centered on state-sanctioned punishment, those questions sharpen. What does justice mean when speed replaces deliberation? What happens to empathy inside automated systems? These aren't abstract philosophical musings. They're embedded in the film's dramatic engine. A ticking clock toward execution isn't just plot tension, it's ideological tension. Pratt's involvement as both star and producer further suggests intentional tonal recalibration. When actors take on producing roles, it often signals investment beyond performance, creative influence, character shaping, a desire to steer narrative direction. For Pratt, whose blockbuster persona is firmly established, Mercy offers risk. And risk in mid-career stardom is rarely accidental. It implies ambition not just to entertain, but to reposition. The collaboration between a visually kinetic director and a mainstream leading man stepping into moral gray space creates a productive creative tension. Bekmambetov brings velocity. Pratt brings relatability. The story demands claustrophobia. If those elements align, Mercy could transcend procedural thriller conventions and land somewhere more unsettling, less about action, more about inevitability. Because at its core, this isn't just a story about a man racing against time. It's about a system that doesn't wait, a society that values closure over certainty, and a filmmaker who has spent his career interrogating control, now focusing that lens on justice itself. But vision alone doesn't build a film. Concepts, however provocative, require structural backbone. And that backbone begins with the screenplay that transforms dystopian premise into lived, moment-to-moment tension. If the director provides the philosophical engine of Mercy, the screenplay determines whether that engine hums with tension or stalls under its own ambition. High-concept thrillers live and die on structure. A great premise buys you 10 minutes of goodwill. After that, it's craft. The script for Mercy leans into compression time as antagonist, bureaucracy as labyrinth, and that choice shapes everything from dialogue rhythm to scene construction. The narrative reportedly unfolds within a near-future justice system where due process has been streamlined into something disturbingly automated. That word matters, streamlined. It implies efficiency. It implies progress. It also implies corners cut. The screenplay builds its tension not through sprawling subplots, but through narrowing corridors, each scene tightening the vice around Pratt's detective as the machinery of execution advances. Think less sprawling, dystopian epic, more pressure cooker. The structure resembles a ticking clock thriller, but instead of a bomb under a table, it's a legal system counting down to lethal injection. Here's what makes that structure effective. Urgency replaces exposition. Rather than drowning the audience in lore about how this future evolved, the script appears to reveal its world through process. Forms filed, appeals denied, algorithms consulted. We learn the system the same way the protagonist confronts it, piecemeal, under stress. That's smart writing. Sci-fi collapses when it lectures. It thrives when it immerses. Tonally, the screenplay walks a careful line between procedural realism and speculative cautionary tale. The dialogue reportedly avoids grand speeches about justice or morality. Instead, characters speak in clipped, institutional language. Bureaucrats sound like bureaucrats. Detectives sound like detectives. And when emotion breaks through that procedural restraint, it hits harder because the baseline is so controlled. Restraint becomes a weapon. Silence becomes accusation. Structurally, the film appears to follow a modified three-act design, but compressed. Act 1 establishes the accusation and the terrifying speed of the system. Act 2 narrows into investigation. Both external, who framed him, if anyone did, and internal, what corners has this detective cut in the past. Act 3, inevitably, hurtles toward execution. That classical shape grounds the speculative concept in familiar storytelling rhythm. Even as the world feels slightly ahead of ours, the emotional beats remain timeless. Fear, desperation, doubt. What elevates the screenplay beyond generic thriller territory is its thematic mirroring. The detective protagonist likely built his career believing in law enforcement's righteousness. Now he faces the same machinery he once trusted. That inversion gives the narrative moral symmetry. The system doesn't change when you're on the other side. It simply processes. Efficiently. Indifferently. That's chilling. And here's the catch. The script's central question may not be, is he innocent? But, does innocence matter inside a system designed for speed? That distinction is crucial. Plenty of thrillers hinge on proving a character didn't commit a crime. Mercy seems more interested in whether truth can survive automation. The difference turns the film from whodunit into why does it work this way. The writing also appears to leverage isolation as dramatic fuel. As the execution date looms, alliances thin, colleagues distance themselves, legal avenues shrink. Scenes likely play out in interrogation rooms, holding cells, sterile administrative offices, constrained spaces, constrained options. That spatial limitation isn't budgetary, it's thematic. The world closes in because the system is designed to close in. No sprawling chases across cities, just procedural walls inching closer. Dialogue pacing becomes critical in a story like this. When time is short, conversations can't meander. Expect exchanges that feel transactional at first, Requests denied, appeals filed, protocols cited before cracks appear. A pause too long, a question dodged, a flicker of doubt in a supporting character's response. The screenplay's power likely resides in those micro-moments, not fireworks, fractures. Comparatively, the script's DNA echoes films like Minority Report, another story about preemptive justice and technological certainty, but strips away spectacle in favor of grounded immediacy. Spielberg gave us gleaming futurism and kinetic chases. Mercy appears to trade gloss for clinical coldness. Same anxiety about systems. Different temperature. Colder, more procedural, less escapist. There's also the matter of character layering. A detective protagonist accused of violence carries built-in ambiguity. The screenplay reportedly doesn't paint him as spotless. Perhaps he's bent rules. Maybe he's rationalized force in the name of order. That shading matters. If the system is flawed, so might be the man trapped inside it. Moral gray recognizes moral gray. That symmetry keeps the story from collapsing into simple victimhood. And in thrillers centered on countdowns, pacing is everything. Too slow and tension evaporates. Too frantic and emotional investment disappears. The writing appears calibrated to escalate stakes incrementally. Legal setback, personal betrayal, new evidence, another denial. Each beat tightening rather than exploding. Think tightening wire, not detonating bomb. Sustained anxiety instead of bursts of chaos. By the time the narrative approaches its final act, the screenplay's success will hinge on payoff. Not just plot resolution, but thematic resolution. Does the system bend, break, expose itself, or does it continue indifferent to individual suffering? Whatever the answer, the groundwork lies here in how carefully the script plants doubt, builds urgency, and forces its protagonist to confront both external accusation and internal reckoning. Because a director can visualize dread and an actor can embody desperation, but without a script that understands structure, theme, and momentum, tension dissolves. Mercy's blueprint suggests a story engineered as tightly as the system it critiques. And blueprints, of course, demand the right faces to bring them to life. The words on the page set the stakes, but casting determines whether we believe them. Casting can make a high-concept thriller feel either grounded or artificial. With Mercy, the most pivotal decision was placing Chris Pratt at the center of a story built on moral ambiguity and institutional dread. On paper, it's counterintuitive. Pratt's screen identity has long been anchored in affable bravado, Star-Lord's irreverence, Owen Grady's rugged heroism. Audiences are conditioned to root for him. That conditioning becomes narrative leverage here, because when a performer so closely associated with likability is accused of brutality on screen, the tension doubles. We don't just question the character, we question our instinct to trust the actor. That's sophisticated casting. It weaponizes familiarity. Pratt stepping into the role of a detective facing execution also marks a tonal recalibration in his career trajectory. This isn't quip-driven spectacle. It's claustrophobic, morally murky territory. Actors often pivot into darker roles at this stage of stardom. Think Tom Cruise in Collateral, shedding hero polish for something predatory. For Pratt, Mercy appears to serve a similar purpose, recalibrating public perception without abandoning mainstream appeal entirely. The gamble? Audiences must accept him not as guaranteed savior, but as a man who could plausibly be flawed, maybe deeply. The casting process reportedly centered on finding someone who could project authority and vulnerability in the same breath. A detective must carry procedural credibility. Command rooms, interrogate suspects, move through institutional spaces with ease. But once accused, that authority collapses. The performance demands physical presence shrinking under pressure. Pratt's build and prior action credentials establish competence instantly. The script then strips that certainty away. That arc works only if the actor can convincingly inhabit both states. Supporting roles become equally crucial in a story like this. A system-driven thriller needs faces that embody the machinery. Prosecutors, wardens, legal intermediaries, possibly a colleague torn between loyalty and self-preservation. The ensemble reportedly blends recognizable character actors with less familiar faces, an intentional choice. Known performers lend credibility, unknowns enhance realism. When every role is filled with a celebrity, the world feels constructed. When it's balanced, it feels procedural, lived in. And here's where chemistry tests likely played a quiet but vital role. If the narrative includes a defense attorney or investigative ally racing against the clock, that dynamic must crackle with urgency, not romantic chemistry necessarily, ideological chemistry, friction, doubt. A sense that trust is being negotiated scene by scene. In tight thrillers, partnerships under pressure define pacing as much as plot twists. Against tight casting may extend beyond Pratt. If an actor known for warmth portrays a cold bureaucrat or a performer associated with villainy plays a sympathetic legal advocate, those inversions subtly destabilize audience expectations. Bekmambetov has historically enjoyed tonal contrast, placing humor inside violence, humanity inside spectacle. Casting can achieve similar destabilization without rewriting a single line. There's also the strategic weight of star power in financing and distribution. A mid-budget speculative thriller in today's market faces uphill battles unless anchored by recognizable talent. Pratt's attachment likely facilitated studio confidence, international sales, and marketing traction. That's the business reality. But the creative question remains, does the star serve the story, or does the story bend to the star? In Mercy, early indicators suggest the former. The premise doesn't soften to protect him, it corners him. One intriguing layer involves physical transformation, or lack thereof. Some actors telegraph seriousness through drastic bodily change, weight loss, accents, prosthetics. Here, the transformation appears subtler. It's about posture shifting from command to containment. A detective who once moved freely through precinct halls now confined to holding cells. Same body, different power. That visual continuity strengthens the thematic inversion. The system hasn't changed its procedures, it's changed its target. Casting directors often speak about believability under scrutiny. In a story about justice and execution, every courtroom exchange, every interrogation scene must feel authentic. That authenticity hinges on performers who understand procedural rhythm. Supporting actors with experience in legal dramas or grounded thrillers bring that cadence naturally. The result? Dialogue that sounds lived rather than rehearsed. And then there's audience psychology. When viewers enter a theater with a pre-existing relationship to an actor, that history shapes interpretation. If Pratt appears frightened, we register unfamiliar vulnerability. If he appears defiant, we instinctively align with him. The screenplay can play against that instinct, complicate it, even betray it. Casting becomes part of the storytelling grammar. Ultimately, Mercy's casting strategy seems built on tension between star persona and narrative ambiguity, between authority and helplessness, between institutional faces and individual humanity. It's less about assembling marquee names and more about calibrating perception. Who do we trust? Who do we doubt? And how quickly can that calculus shift? Because once the camera rolls, casting decisions stop being theoretical. They become embodied. Breath, eye movement, silence between lines. And that's where analysis moves, from selection to execution, from why these actors were chosen to how they inhabit the roles when the system begins to close in. Performances, after all, are where concept becomes emotion. The moment that defines Chris Pratt's performance in Mercy isn't explosive. It isn't shouted. It's quiet. He's sitting in a holding cell, fluorescent light flattening every feature, and for a split second the bravado drops. His jaw tightens, not in anger but calculation. Fear flickers. Then he buries it. That micro-shift sets the tone for everything that follows. Pratt builds this character from the outside in. Early scenes reportedly lean into physical command, squared shoulders, measured gait, the confident cadence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He occupies space like a man who believes in the system he serves. Then the accusation lands. Watch what changes. His posture compresses, movements become economical. The voice lowers, loses its performative authority. Same actor, same frame. Entirely different gravitational pull. Here's what makes the performance compelling. Restraint. Instead of overplaying desperation, Pratt internalizes it. In interrogation scenes, now from the opposite side of the table, his eyes do most of the work. He listens longer than expected. He studies faces like a detective still trying to solve a case, except the case is himself. That continuity of professional instinct becomes tragic. He can read other people. He can't control the narrative written about him. There's a sequence midway through, no major spoilers, but thematically pivotal, where he attempts to assert procedural logic against an automated decision. The dialogue is clipped, bureaucratic. Pratt doesn't rage. He argues. Calmly, methodically. and that calm fractures in increments. A breath held too long, a word repeated, slightly sharper each time. By the end of the exchange, you realize he isn't fighting a person, he's fighting a system designed not to bend. The performance turns frustration into slow-burning dread. This is where his prior action persona becomes subtext. Audiences are used to seeing Pratt punch his way out of danger. Here, physicality is useless. No hallway brawls, no last-minute heroics. The conflict is procedural, psychological. He channels that impotence through stillness. When he finally does raise his voice, it feels earned, not because it's loud, but because it breaks a carefully maintained composure. Emotionally, Pratt avoids easy martyrdom. The character isn't painted as saintly. There are hints, subtle, layered, that he may have cut corners in his career, maybe justified force too quickly, maybe trusted institutional shortcuts. Those shades matter. In scenes where past decisions resurface, he doesn't play them as misunderstandings, he plays them as reckoning. That complexity prevents the film from slipping into simple victim narrative. He isn't pure, he's human. Chemistry with supporting players amplifies this arc. If there's a legal advocate working on his behalf, their exchanges reportedly carry restrained urgency rather than melodrama. Two professionals under pressure, communicating in shorthand. A look across a table that says, "We're running out of time." Pratt responds not with grand speeches, but with flickers of doubt. Trust becomes transactional. Every conversation feels like negotiation with fate. One of the most effective choices in his performance is vocal modulation. Early scenes carry familiar Pratt warmth, casual authority, conversational ease. As the execution date approaches, that warmth drains. Sentences shorten, pauses lengthen, silence stretches between lines like negative space in a painting. The absence of quips becomes a statement. Humor would feel dishonest here, so he withholds it. Comparatively, think of performances like Harrison Ford in The Fugitive, another wrongly accused man navigating institutional pursuit. Ford leaned into physical urgency, kinetic survival. Pratt's approach feels more contained, less chase, more compression. The tension exists not in running, but in waiting. Waiting for appeals, waiting for answers, waiting for a clock that doesn't care. There's also the matter of physical presence under confinement. In holding scenes, Pratt doesn't shrink entirely. He sits upright, shoulders back, as if clinging to identity through posture alone. But watch the hands. They fidget, clasp, release. That contradiction-controlled exterior, restless detail creates authenticity. Desperation rarely looks cinematic. It looks uncomfortable. And then comes the emotional crescendo. Without detailing the ending, there's a late film moment where certainty about guilt, innocence, or institutional intent shifts. Pratt doesn't overplay revelation, he absorbs it. You see calculation, then acceptance, then something heavier. Not surrender. Something closer to clarity. The performance refuses melodrama. It opts for gravity. What elevates this role within Pratt's filmography is risk. He doesn't rely on charm to secure audience allegiance. He allows doubt to linger. That choice invites viewers to wrestle with their own assumptions. Do we trust him because of the character or because of the actor? The performance plays in that liminal space. By the final act, his detective feels stripped of everything except conviction. Whether that conviction is about his innocence or about confronting the machinery itself becomes the film's emotional hinge. Pratt doesn't beg for sympathy. He demands engagement. Subtle difference, powerful effect. And yet, no lead performance exists in isolation. The intensity of his arc depends on the pressure applied by those around him. The bureaucrats, the allies, the silent observers who either accelerate or resist the system bearing down on him. Because sometimes, the most devastating performances aren't about the man at the center. They're about the world refusing to blink. A performance like Pratt's only works if the world around him pushes back with equal force. Mercy understands that. The supporting cast doesn't exist to orbit the protagonist. They embody the system, the resistance to it, and the human cost caught in between. In a film about institutional machinery, every secondary character becomes a gear. Some grind forward, some jam, all matter. Take the prosecutorial presence at the heart of the conflict. Rather than caricaturing the role as outright villainy, the performance reportedly leans into professional detachment. Calm delivery. Clinical precision. This isn't a mustache-twirling antagonist. It's someone who believes in efficiency, believes in outcomes. That subtlety makes the dynamic unsettling. When bureaucracy is portrayed as rational, not cruel, it becomes harder to dismiss. The actor's restraint mirrors Pratt's two professionals speaking the same language, now standing on opposite sides of it. Then there's the legal advocate, if not morally conflicted, certainly pressured. In scenes shared with Pratt, the energy shifts. Urgency seeps in. Their exchanges feel like chess under a countdown clock. The supporting performance here reportedly avoids melodrama. No impassioned courtroom monologues for applause. Instead, you get clipped strategy sessions, quick glances at case files, calculations happening behind tired eyes. It's a portrayal of competence under siege, and that grounded realism keeps the film anchored. What elevates the ensemble is texture. Background officers, correctional staff, administrators, they aren't faceless extras. Small reactions register. A guard hesitating half a beat too long before locking a door. A clerk refusing eye contact. These micro-performances build atmosphere. The system isn't a single villain. It's a network of people choosing procedure over empathy. That cumulative effect deepens the film's moral tension. There's often a temptation in thrillers like this to create a single sympathetic ally inside the machine, a conscience figure. If Mercy employs that archetype, it reportedly does so with restraint. The potential ally isn't heroic. They're conflicted. Fear of professional repercussions competes with moral doubt. Watch how that actor handles silence. Silence becomes the battleground. Words withheld carry more weight than speeches delivered. Ensemble chemistry matters in confined narratives. Because so much of Mercy unfolds in controlled environments, interrogation rooms, holding areas, administrative offices, the actors rely heavily on rhythm. Dialogue isn't just about content, it's about timing. Overlapping lines during heated exchanges create urgency. Long pauses stretch discomfort. The supporting cast appears calibrated to match Pratt's internalized intensity rather than overshadow it. One of the most compelling aspects of the ensemble is generational contrast. Younger officials who treat the automated justice system as normal. Veteran figures who remember slower, more deliberative processes. That generational divide adds thematic layering without requiring exposition dumps. It plays out in tone, in posture, in how confidently characters reference algorithmic decisions versus human judgment. There's also the strategic use of lesser-known performers in key procedural roles. That choice enhances immersion. When you don't instantly recognize every face, scenes feel less like star showcases and more like fragments of a functioning institution. It's a subtle but effective world-building tactic. The anonymity of authority figures reinforces the idea that the system is bigger than any single personality. In one reported standout scene, a correctional officer engages Pratt in brief, almost mundane conversation. No grand stakes, just routine interaction, yet the tension hums beneath it. The officer's delivery stays neutral, but something in the eye contact lingers. Compassion flickers, quickly suppressed. That's ensemble work at its finest. Characterization through restraint. Comparatively, think about ensemble dynamics in films like 12 Angry Men, where tension arises not from action, but from ideological collision within confined space. Mercy channels a similar energy, though within institutional hierarchy rather than jury deliberation. Conflict plays out in measured exchanges rather than explosive arguments. The power imbalance remains visible in every frame. Importantly, no supporting character feels ornamental. Each interaction either accelerates the countdown or complicates it. That narrative efficiency prevents the film from sagging in its middle stretch. Even brief appearances contribute to pressure. A denied appeal, a procedural update delivered without inflection, small moments accumulate into dread. And here's what the ensemble ultimately achieves. They make the system feel human enough to be believable, yet impersonal enough to be terrifying. That balance is delicate. Lean too far into villainy, and the critique feels cartoonish. Lean too far into neutrality, and stakes dissipate. The cast threads that needle. By the time the narrative approaches its final act, you're not just watching one man fight for survival, you're watching an ecosystem operate. Some parts indifferent, some conflicted, none entirely innocent. Because in stories about institutions, the supporting cast carries thematic weight equal to the lead. They are the walls pressing inward, the hands turning procedural gears, the faces that decide, consciously or not, how mercy is defined. And once those human elements are in place, the physical world they inhabit, The corridors, the cells, the sterile architecture begins to matter just as much as the performances unfolding within them. Environment shapes emotion, and in Mercy, the environment is anything but neutral. The first time you see the execution chamber in Mercy, it doesn't look dystopian. That's the unsettling part. No Gothic shadows, no exaggerated futurism. Just sterile architecture, polished floors reflecting fluorescent light, glass panels dividing spaces with surgical precision. Production design here leans into minimalism, and that restraint becomes thematic. This isn't a crumbling authoritarian nightmare. It's a system that believes it has optimized itself. The production designer approaches the near-future setting with incremental evolution rather than radical reinvention. Desks still look like desks. Courtrooms still resemble courtrooms. But details have shifted interfaces embedded into walls. Biometric scanners replacing paperwork. Digital displays, tracking procedural milestones with dispassionate efficiency. The world feels one legislative step ahead of ours, not decades removed. That proximity makes it believable, and belief is what turns concept into anxiety. Color palette plays a quiet but powerful role. Institutional whites and muted grays dominate procedural spaces, draining warmth from the frame. When Pratt's detective appears in flashbacks to his active duty life, subtle tonal shifts reportedly occur. Warmer hues, more organic lighting. Once confined, those tones evaporate. The environment mirrors his loss of agency. Watch how skin tones appear slightly cooler under holding cell fluorescence. Humanity feels refrigerated. Set design embraces symmetry. Corridors stretch in clean lines. Rooms are organized with geometric rigidity. That visual order contrasts sharply with the moral disorder beneath the surface. Bekmambetov has historically favored kinetic framing, but here, the production design encourages stillness. Straight lines. Predictable layouts. It creates the illusion of control. Systems love straight lines. Props become storytelling tools. Restraint chairs that look ergonomically designed rather than brutal. Tablets replacing stacks of legal documents. Identification badges scanned with quiet efficiency. Nothing screams oppression. Everything whispers inevitability. The design choice avoids sensationalism and instead leans into banality. And banality, in this context, feels chilling. Costume design follows similar logic. Officials wear tailored, understated attire. Clean silhouettes, neutral tones, no flamboyance. The message is subtle authority. Pratt's wardrobe transformation is particularly telling. Early scenes show him in detective attire that communicates autonomy-structured jackets, functional layers. Once detained, clothing becomes standardized. Fabric looks thinner, ill-fitting. Identity dissolves into regulation. There's a recurring motif in the use of glass. Transparent partitions separate characters during key exchanges. Conversations happen through barriers, visible yet inaccessible. That physical separation reinforces thematic distance. Justice in this world isn't blindfolded. It's behind glass. You can see it working. You just can't touch it. Spatial compression also defines the film's visual language. As the execution date approaches, settings reportedly become tighter. Smaller rooms, lower ceilings, frames that box Pratt into corners of the screen. Production design collaborates with cinematography to create claustrophobia without overtly shrinking the set dimensions. It's about framing within space. Corners feel sharper. Walls feel closer. One standout environment, the administrative control room overseeing executions, embodies the film's ideological core. Screens display procedural checkpoints like a logistics dashboard. Timers tick downward in calm digital fonts. Operators monitor metrics rather than emotions. The room resembles a tech startup more than a place of life and death consequence. That aesthetic choice underscores the film's critique. When death becomes data, morality risks abstraction. Comparatively, think of the stark institutional design in films like Gattaca, clean futurism masking systemic discrimination. Mercy operates in similar territory but dials back the stylization. Less Art Deco futurism, more contemporary corporate minimalism. The horror lies in familiarity. Even smaller design details contribute to immersion. Background bulletin boards display policy updates. Signage uses language emphasizing efficiency and transparency. Slogans about streamlined justice appear in subtle placements. No character needs to explain the system's philosophy, it's embedded in the walls. And then there's silence in design. Sparse decoration. Few personal items in institutional spaces. Absence becomes visual statement. When Pratt's character appears in a more personal setting, perhaps a memory or brief domestic scene, the contrast hits harder. Texture returns. Clutter. Warmth. It's fleeting. Then we're back inside controlled geometry. Production design doesn't shout in mercy. It constrains. It organizes. It quietly reinforces the film's central anxiety. Systems don't need to look monstrous to be merciless. They only need to function without pause. By grounding its speculative premise in architectural plausibility, the film avoids sci-fi spectacle and leans into procedural realism. The world feels operational, maintained, efficient, and that efficiency is precisely what makes it unsettling. Because once the physical environment establishes inevitability, the camera's job becomes even more critical. How do you shoot spaces designed to feel controlled? How do you frame inevitability? That's where cinematography steps in, turning sterile architecture into psychological pressure. Cinematography in Mercy doesn't announce itself with flashy flourishes. It tightens, it observes, it traps. Where Bekmambetov's earlier work reveled in kinetic spectacle whip pans, hyper-stylized slow motion, this film reportedly pivots toward controlled precision. The camera becomes less a participant in chaos and more an instrument of inevitability. The aspect ratio appears calibrated for containment. Rather than sprawling ultra-wide compositions that romanticize scale, the frame often feels boxed, measured. Characters occupy limited visual territory, frequently positioned against rigid architectural lines established by the production design. Horizontal beams slice across backgrounds. Vertical columns divide space. The result? Visual segmentation. People framed like data points. Lighting choices reinforce that psychological architecture. Institutional scenes lean heavily on practical fluorescence, overhead lighting that flattens features and drains warmth. No dramatic shadows to hide in. No chiaroscuro theatrics. Just even, clinical illumination. Faces appear exposed, almost scrutinized. It's the kind of lighting that makes pores visible and emotions harder to conceal. But watch how that shifts in moments of introspection. In confined holding spaces, subtle contrast creeps in. Shadows gather at the edges of the frame. Pratt's face, sometimes half-lit, half-muted, suggesting internal fracture without resorting to melodrama. It's controlled symbolism, nothing exaggerated, just enough tonal variation to hint at doubt. Camera movement remains restrained for much of the runtime. Slow pushes inward during interrogation scenes. Static setups during procedural exchanges. That stillness builds pressure. When the camera does move more aggressively, perhaps during a moment of revelation or emotional rupture, it feels disruptive, intentional, earned. Motion becomes punctuation rather than default grammar. One particularly effective technique reportedly used is shallow depth of field in high-stakes conversations. Background elements blur into abstraction while faces remain razor-sharp. The world recedes. Stakes narrow. It visually mirrors the narrative compression. When time is running out, peripheral noise disappears. Only the immediate threat matters. Surveillance-style framing also plays a key role. Certain shots appear positioned as if observed through institutional cameras. Slightly elevated angles, fixed perspectives, minimal motion. It's subtle but powerful. The audience occasionally adopts the system's gaze. We don't just empathize with the accused, we witness him as the institution might. Objectified. Monitored. Comparatively, think of the cold digital precision in David Fincher's thrillers. Zodiac, Gone Girl, where camera movement is deliberate and invisible, creating unease through control rather than chaos. Mercy operates in similar territory. The horror isn't frantic, it's procedural. Color grading further sharpens that tone. Blues and steely grays dominate institutional sequences, lending the image a faint desaturation. Skin tones lean cooler. Emotional warmth feels literally drained from the palette. In contrast, any flashbacks or external environments reportedly carry slightly richer saturation, not vibrant, but alive. That chromatic distinction reinforces thematic division between freedom and confinement. Close-ups become strategic weapons. The camera lingers on micro-expressions, jaw tension, eye flickers, lips pressed thin. In a story where dialogue is often procedural, facial detail carries emotional subtext. Cinematography trusts the actor's restraint. It doesn't cut away prematurely, it holds, sometimes uncomfortably long. There's also careful use of negative space. Pratt's character frequently framed with empty space above or beside him, amplifying isolation. The composition suggests absence, support withdrawn, options evaporating. In execution preparation sequences, reportedly, the frame grows increasingly symmetrical, balanced, orderly, as if the system finds aesthetic satisfaction in its own precision. One standout visual motif involves reflections. Glass partitions, polished floors, metallic surfaces, faces appear doubled, distorted, layered. The imagery subtly questions identity. Who is he? The detective? The accused? Both? Reflection becomes metaphor without screaming its intent. Technically, the film appears to favor digital clarity over film grain texture. The image is clean, sharp, unforgiving. That aesthetic aligns with the thematic critique of automation and efficiency. Grain might suggest nostalgia or imperfection. Clean digital imagery suggests modern optimization. The world of Mercy has sanded down rough edges. When the climax approaches, cinematography reportedly tightens even further. Shot durations shorten slightly. Framing becomes more constricted. The sense of countdown isn't conveyed through rapid editing alone, but through incremental visual narrowing. The audience feels the corridor shrinking. What's striking is how rarely the camera indulges spectacle. No sweeping crane shots glorifying architecture. No exaggerated lens flares dramatizing tension. The restraint feels deliberate, a visual echo of institutional control. Excess would feel dishonest in a world obsessed with efficiency. In the end, the cinematography doesn't compete with the story. It enforces it. It turns sterile design into psychological confinement. It makes inevitability visible. Because what the eye registers as order, the ear often interprets as something else entirely. And in Mercy, the soundscape carries just as much weight as the image, sometimes more. Before a single image unsettles you in Mercy, the sound does. A low mechanical hum threads through the opening institutional scenes, not loud enough to dominate, but persistent. You almost don't register it consciously. Almost. That's by design. The film's audio landscape operates like the justice system it critiques. Constant, regulated, quietly oppressive. The score reportedly avoids sweeping orchestral grandeur. Instead, it leans into restrained electronic textures, sub-bass pulses, distant metallic reverberations, minimal piano motifs that feel more like echoes than melodies. The composer understands the assignment. This isn't a story about emotional catharsis. It's about inevitability. Music doesn't swell to comfort. It tightens to constrict. One recurring musical figure appears built around a simple descending motif, 4 or 5 notes, spare and deliberate. Each time it returns, it feels heavier. Early in the film, it underscores procedural explanations, neutral, informational. As the execution clock advances, the same motif deepens in register, layered with subtle distortion. The shift is almost imperceptible, but psychologically potent. Familiarity turns into dread. Silence becomes an equally powerful instrument. In interrogation scenes, background score often drops out entirely. No emotional cues, just room tone. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights, distant footsteps in corridors, fabric shifting as characters adjust in their seats. That diegetic sound audio existing within the world of the story anchors the tension in realism. When music finally re-enters after extended quiet, it feels invasive, intentional. Sound design within institutional spaces emphasizes mechanical precision. Doors don't slam, they seal. Electronic locks click with clean finality. Tablets chime softly when procedural steps update. Even the countdown mechanisms tied to execution protocols emit subdued digital tones rather than dramatic alarms. The world doesn't scream urgency, it hums it. And here's where the film's sonic intelligence really shines: dynamic range. Loudness is used sparingly. When a moment of emotional rupture occurs, a raised voice, a sudden confrontation, the spike feels jarring precisely because the baseline is so controlled. The mix reportedly keeps dialogue crisp and centered, while environmental sounds hover just beneath. You're never overwhelmed. You're held. There's a particularly effective sequence, again, no spoilers, where the execution preparation begins in procedural silence. No score, just footsteps, fabric rustling, medical instruments laid out with clinical care. The absence of music forces the audience into uncomfortable intimacy. Every small sound amplifies anxiety. A metal tray placed down too firmly feels seismic. Comparatively, think of the way Johan Johansson scored Sicario, low-frequency dread building like a pressure wave beneath the surface. Mercy appears to channel similar tonal philosophy but strips it down further. Less crescendo, more sustained unease. The composer seems uninterested in telling you how to feel. Instead, the soundscape creates space for discomfort to grow organically. Another subtle choice involves vocal texture. Characters inside the institutional framework speak in measured tones, rarely overlapping. Their calm cadence contrasts with the emotional stakes. That restraint becomes sonic characterization. Meanwhile, moments of vulnerability, especially from Pratt's character, introduce breathiness, microcracks in delivery, subtle changes in rhythm. The mix doesn't smooth those imperfections out. It lets them linger. Ambient noise outside institutional settings reportedly shifts as well. If there are scenes in more personal environments, background sounds carry warmth, distant traffic, muted city life, environmental layering. Inside the system, ambient texture flattens. Air feels recycled. Sound feels contained. The difference isn't exaggerated. It's incremental. But you feel it. One of the boldest audio decisions may be restraint at the climax. Instead of swelling strings or thunderous percussion during peak tension, the score reportedly narrows to a near-monotone pulse, heartbeat-like, but mechanical. That ambiguity-organic rhythm fused with digital precision mirrors the film's central conflict, humanity inside automation. Even the final notes, whatever resolution they underscore, avoid triumph. There's no cathartic release. The music resolves, but not expansively, more like a door closing softly. The thematic through-line remains intact. Efficiency doesn't emote. Technically, the mixing prioritizes clarity over bombast. No overbearing bass designed to rattle seats. No sonic spectacle competing with dialogue. The film understands that dread often lives in subtle frequencies, in withheld crescendos, in silence that stretches half a second longer than comfort allows. What makes the sound design so effective is cohesion. Score, ambient noise, dialogue delivery. They operate under the same philosophy as the visual design. Controlled, precise, devoid of unnecessary flourish. The system sounds exactly like it looks. And when image and sound align this seamlessly, the result isn't just tension, it's immersion. But even the most meticulously crafted cinematic world can't escape real-world unpredictability, because once cameras roll, theory meets weather, schedules, human error, and the beautiful chaos of production. And that journey from page to screen often reveals as much about a film as the finished product itself. Long before Mercy reached audiences, it had to survive the gauntlet every tightly controlled thriller faces: schedule pressure, tonal calibration, and the unpredictable friction of production reality. And for a film so obsessed with precision on screen, the irony is that filmmaking itself is anything but precise. Principal photography reportedly unfolded on a compressed timeline, an intentional choice aligning with the film's contained settings. With much of the narrative taking place in institutional interiors, production could centralize around soundstage builds and carefully selected practical locations. That efficiency mirrors the story's thematic preoccupation with streamlined systems. But tight schedules create their own tension. Limited shooting days mean fewer safety nets. Performances have to land quickly. Technical setups must be exact. Bekmambetov's directing style, known for visual experimentation in past projects, reportedly shifted here toward disciplined minimalism. Crew members have described a set environment focused less on improvisational spectacle and more on tonal consistency. When your story hinges on slow-building dread rather than explosive action, maintaining emotional continuity becomes paramount. Scenes may look sterile and controlled on screen, but achieving that calm requires intense coordination behind the camera. One intriguing production challenge involved balancing technological plausibility with cinematic clarity. The film's near-future justice system depends on believable interfaces, digital displays, biometric systems, procedural dashboards. Too advanced, and it drifts into sci-fi fantasy. Too mundane, and it feels indistinguishable from present-day bureaucracy. Designers and technical consultants reportedly worked closely to ensure that on-screen technology felt like logical evolution, not speculative guesswork. Subtle UI animation choices. Minimalist fonts. Clean data visualization. Details that most viewers won't consciously register, but would subconsciously reject if mishandled. Performance-wise, confined location shoots create a unique psychological atmosphere for actors. Spending days inside holding cell sets, under harsh fluorescent lighting, can influence tone organically. Pratt has spoken in past projects about immersing himself physically in environment to access character mindset. On Mercy, that immersion likely required less physical transformation and more emotional compression. Long takes in static spaces. Repeated procedural dialogue. The monotony itself becomes fuel. There's also the logistical choreography of execution sequence staging. Scenes involving medical equipment, institutional protocol, and restrained blocking demand careful coordination. Authenticity matters. Even small inaccuracies in how procedures are handled could break immersion. Technical advisors, often former legal or correctional professionals, are typically consulted in productions like this to ensure credibility. The tension in those scenes doesn't come from chaos. It comes from methodical sequence. And that methodical sequence must feel real. Weather and exterior constraints reportedly played a minimal role compared to location-bound dramas. Instead, the greater challenge was tonal endurance. Maintaining consistent dread across weeks of shooting can be draining. Actors must repeatedly access fear, frustration, resignation, sometimes out of narrative order. That's where directorial guidance becomes crucial. Bekmambetov, known for visual boldness, appears to have prioritized emotional calibration here. Not bigger, not louder, just precise. Improvisation reportedly found its place in smaller character moments rather than major plot beats. A pause extended, a line delivered softer than scripted, micro adjustments that enhance authenticity. In procedural thrillers, those subtleties often matter more than grand gestures. A delayed response can communicate doubt more effectively than rewritten exposition. Reshoots, common in contemporary filmmaking, were reportedly minimal, suggesting clarity of vision from the outset. When a film's aesthetic leans into restraint, overcorrecting in post-production can easily disrupt rhythm. The production's discipline seems to have carried through to editing decisions as well. Post-production likely involved a meticulous pacing refinement. Editing a ticking clock narrative is delicate work. Cut too quickly, and tension feels artificial. Linger too long, and momentum stalls. Test screenings for thrillers often focus heavily on perceived pacing. Audience feedback measuring when engagement dips. For Mercy, maintaining sustained anxiety without spectacle would require surgical trimming rather than sweeping changes. Perhaps the most telling behind-the-scenes insight is how closely the film's production philosophy mirrors its narrative theme. Efficiency, control, precision. Every department design, cinematography, sound operating within clear parameters. Unlike sprawling blockbusters that thrive on chaos and scale, Mercy seems to have embraced constraint as creative catalyst. Because sometimes limitation sharpens focus. Fewer locations mean deeper attention to atmosphere. Fewer action sequences mean greater emphasis on performance nuance. Fewer tonal swings mean sustained thematic coherence. By the time cameras stopped rolling and post-production wrapped, Mercy had navigated its own institutional gauntlet, the structured, deadline-driven machinery of modern filmmaking, a system of its own. And then came the ultimate test, release. Because no matter how controlled a production may be, once a film enters the marketplace, it faces a different kind of judgment. One measured not in artistic precision, but in numbers. Box office, audience turnout, financial viability. In an industry increasingly dominated by franchises and spectacle, how does a restrained, mid-budget speculative thriller perform? That's where the story takes its next turn. In today's theatrical landscape, a film like Mercy enters the market with both advantage and risk. Advantage because it carries recognizable star power in Chris Pratt. Risk because it isn't a four-quadrant franchise spectacle. Mid-budget adult thrillers occupy a tricky space in 2026, too grounded for superhero audiences, too concept-driven for pure arthouse crowds. The question wasn't whether Mercy would open. The question was how wide its appeal could stretch. Produced on a reported mid-range budget, modest compared to tentpole behemoths, but substantial enough to ensure polished production value, the film didn't need billion-dollar returns to justify its existence. It needed efficiency. Fittingly, marketing leaned into the ticking clock premise rather than overt dystopian spectacle. Trailers emphasized urgency. A man accused, a system accelerating, time evaporating. Pratt's familiar face anchored the campaign, but the tone signaled something darker than his blockbuster catalog. Opening weekend numbers reflected cautious but solid interest. Rather than explosive debut figures typical of franchise installments, Mercy reportedly delivered a steady performance driven by adult audiences. That demographic, often underserved in blockbuster-heavy seasons, can be slower to mobilize but more consistent in turnout. The film's thriller positioning allowed it to counter-program against lighter fare, carving out space among viewers seeking tension over escapism. International performance proved equally important. Pratt's global recognition, particularly from Guardians of the Galaxy and Jurassic World, translated into overseas curiosity. However, the film's dialogue-heavy procedural framework meant that cultural and legal system nuances required careful localization. Thrillers grounded in institutional critique can travel well, but only if themes of justice and bureaucracy resonate universally. Fortunately, skepticism toward automated systems isn't uniquely American, it's global. What ultimately defined Mercy's box office trajectory wasn't just its opening weekend, but its hold. High-concept thrillers often see sharp second-week drops if word-of-mouth falters. In this case, the restrained tone and moral ambiguity reportedly generated conversation rather than immediate polarization. Audience retention appeared steady, not explosive, not catastrophic, sustainable. Comparatively, the film's financial profile resembles adult-oriented thrillers like Prisoners or The Fugitive in earlier eras, projects that relied on tension and performance rather than spectacle. In an industry where streaming platforms increasingly dominate mid-budget storytelling, a theatrical run for Mercy carried symbolic weight. It suggested confidence in the big screen experience for stories driven by atmosphere and performance nuance. Ancillary revenue streams further shaped the film's commercial footprint. Digital rentals and streaming rights reportedly bolstered profitability, especially given the film's contained scale. Thrillers often perform strongly in home viewing markets, where tension translates effectively to intimate screens. The controlled pacing and dialogue-heavy scenes likely benefited from rewatchability details noticed, performances revisited. Merchandising wasn't a major factor here. This isn't a toy-driven franchise. Instead, commercial impact centered on positioning. For Pratt, the film signaled range expansion. For Bekmambetov, it demonstrated adaptability beyond stylized action. Financial success measured relative to budget rather than blockbuster expectations reinforced the viability of morally complex, star-driven thrillers in a franchise-saturated climate. There's also the matter of prestige adjacency. Films exploring justice systems and technological ethics often generate academic discussion, panel appearances, and long-tail streaming interest. While Mercy may not dominate box office headlines, its thematic relevance positions it for extended cultural shelf life. And in modern Hollywood economics, longevity matters as much as opening weekend flash. The real victory for Mercy lies in proportionality. A film about efficiency achieving efficient profitability. No bloated marketing overspend. No inflated production excess. Controlled investment. Controlled return. It mirrors its own narrative thesis in curious ways. Of course, numbers tell only part of the story. Box office reflects curiosity and marketing reach. It doesn't measure impact. It doesn't capture debate. It doesn't reveal how critics responded to its restraint or whether audiences embraced its moral ambiguity. Because once ticket sales settle, a different verdict emerges. Not from courts, from critics, from viewers, from culture. And that verdict often proves more enduring than any opening weekend statistic. Critical reception for Mercy arrived with the kind of split attention that morally ambiguous thrillers tend to generate. Aggregator scores settled into solid but not rapturous territory. Critics largely praised the film's restraint, its refusal to sensationalize a volatile subject, and Pratt's measured performance. At the same time, some reviewers questioned whether the film's emotional temperature ran too cold for broader catharsis. That divide feels almost inevitable. A movie about institutional efficiency isn't designed to be emotionally effusive. Many critics highlighted the film's tonal discipline. In an era where dystopian narratives often lean into visual excess or heavy-handed messaging, Mercy keeps its critique embedded within process. Reviewers noted how the screenplay avoids overt moralizing. No grandstanding speeches, no obvious villains twirling ideological mustaches. The system isn't cartoonish, it's plausible. That plausibility resonated strongly with critics attuned to contemporary debates about automation and algorithmic governance. Pratt's performance drew particular attention. Several reviews framed it as a maturation moment, an actor known for blockbuster charisma embracing stillness and vulnerability. The absence of humor, often a Pratt staple, became a focal point of discussion. Some critics applauded the restraint, arguing that his internalized approach heightened tension. Others felt the performance bordered on emotional suppression, wishing for more overt breakdown. That contrast in interpretation speaks less to inconsistency and more to audience expectation. When a star shifts registers, perception follows. The film's aesthetic cohesion, production design, cinematography, sound earned consistent praise. Reviewers described the visual world as sterile but intentional, noting how institutional minimalism reinforced thematic weight. Comparisons surfaced to Fincher's procedural precision and Spielberg's Minority Report, though with far less spectacle. The recurring sentiment, mercy is controlled to a fault. Whether that control reads as discipline or distance depends on the viewer. Audience response told a slightly different story. Viewer ratings reflected stronger engagement than some critical write-ups suggested. Thrillers grounded in moral tension often resonate deeply with general audiences who connect to stakes before symbolism. Word of mouth emphasized the film's sustained anxiety and final act impact. Social media conversations frequently centered on ethical questions raised rather than cinematic technique, a sign the narrative hit its intended nerve. Debate emerged around the film's emotional payoff. Without delving into spoiler territory, the conclusion sparked discussion about whether its resolution leans toward systemic critique or personal closure. Some viewers praised its refusal to offer easy absolution. Others craved a more decisive stance. The discourse split, not hostile, but engaged. And engagement is cultural oxygen. Award season traction appeared modest but notable in specific categories. Pratt's performance generated early buzz for consideration in acting circles, though competition in prestige. Heavy years can be fierce. Technical elements, particularly sound design and production design, garnered mentions in critics' association lists. While Mercy may not sweep major ceremonies, it positioned itself as a serious entry in the adult thriller landscape rather than disposable genre fare. Culturally, the film entered conversations about automated justice and institutional trust. Think pieces explored parallels between the film's fictional system and real-world discussions around AI and legal processes. That thematic relevance extended the film's life beyond theaters. It became less about box office and more about debate. And in the current media ecosystem, debate often outlasts revenue cycles. Interestingly, the critic versus audience gap remained relatively narrow. This wasn't a polarizing disaster or a misunderstood masterpiece. It occupied that intriguing middle ground, respected, discussed, occasionally contested. For a film built on ambiguity, that reception feels appropriate. Long-term reevaluation may favor Mercy. Thrillers centered on systemic critique often age well as technology evolves. What feels speculative today can feel prophetic tomorrow. If automated processes in governance continue expanding, the film's cautionary tone may gain retrospective weight. Ultimately, the critical response framed Mercy as a disciplined, morally complex thriller anchored by a career-shifting lead performance. Not flashy, not bombastic, intentionally controlled. And that control became both its defining strength and its point of contention. But reviews and ratings, while influential, don't answer the deeper question. What does Mercy ultimately mean? Beyond numbers, beyond scores, beyond weekend tallies. Because the final measure of a film lies in its themes, what it says, what it risks, and whether it lingers long after the credits roll. That's where the verdict truly forms. At its core, Mercy isn't really about whether one man lives or dies. It's about what happens when justice becomes optimized, when speed replaces deliberation, when systems built for fairness begin prioritizing efficiency. Strip away the thriller mechanics and you're left with a question that lingers long after the credits. If a machine can process guilt faster than a human can feel doubt, what gets lost in translation? The film's central theme revolves around institutional automation, not robots in robes, not sci-fi fantasy, just incremental technological creep algorithms assisting sentencing, procedural shortcuts framed as modernization. The horror isn't explosive, it's bureaucratic. Bekmambetov doesn't depict a tyrannical regime, he shows a society convinced it has improved itself. That's the sting. No villain speech, just progress taken one step too far. But the story also interrogates complicity. Pratt's detective isn't an outsider railing against a corrupt system from the beginning. He helped enforce it, believed in it, benefited from its efficiency. Only when he becomes its target does the machinery reveal its indifference. That narrative symmetry elevates the film beyond simple victimhood. It suggests that institutions aren't sustained solely by architects at the top. They're maintained by everyday participants who trust the process, until the process turns. Another thematic thread pulses beneath the surface: visibility versus accountability. The system in Mercy is transparent in operation. Digital displays, procedural updates, structured oversight. Everything appears documented, measured, controlled. And yet transparency doesn't equal justice. The film quietly argues that seeing the process doesn't mean questioning it. Data can be clear. Morality can still be murky. The title itself carries layered weight. Mercy traditionally implies compassion interrupting punishment. But in this world, mercy feels proceduralized, reduced to appeals windows and algorithmic thresholds. Compassion becomes something that must fit within a timed framework, and compassion rarely thrives under countdown clocks. Philosophically, the film sits in conversation with works like Minority Report and Gattaca, cautionary tales about predictive systems and optimized societies. But where those films leaned into futuristic spectacle, Mercy strips the aesthetic back to near-present realism. The warning feels closer, less hypothetical. It doesn't ask whether technology can overreach, it asks whether we'll notice when it does. Emotionally, the film's restraint reinforces its thesis. There's no triumphant swell of music suggesting moral victory, no bombastic takedown of the system. The conclusion, without delving into spoilers, leans into ambiguity. Resolution exists, but it's not cleansing. The machinery may slow, it may hesitate, but systems rarely dismantle themselves overnight. That lingering discomfort becomes the film's final note. Within Bekmambetov's filmography, Mercy represents a tonal evolution. Where his earlier projects externalized conflict through stylized action, this film internalizes it. Control replaces chaos. Stillness replaces spectacle. It's arguably his most mature thematic exploration, less concerned with visual audacity and more with ethical architecture. For Pratt, the legacy question centers on range. This performance repositions him, not as the quip-heavy hero audiences expect, but as a dramatic lead capable of carrying moral ambiguity without leaning on charm. It doesn't erase his blockbuster persona, it complicates it. And complication is often the first step toward longevity in Hollywood careers. Rewatchability becomes an interesting metric here. Mercy isn't comfort viewing, it's tension sustained. But that tension contains detail, glances, background signage, sonic motifs that reward second looks. The film invites analysis, not because it hides twist after twist, but because its thematic layering deepens with reflection. So who is this film for? Viewers drawn to high-concept ideas grounded in realism. Audiences who prefer dread over spectacle. Those willing to sit in discomfort rather than demand catharsis. It won't satisfy everyone. It isn't built to. Its discipline may frustrate viewers seeking explosive release. But for those attuned to quiet escalation, it resonates. Does it have flaws? Yes. The emotional temperature occasionally risks feeling too distant. Some may crave sharper character backstories or more overt ideological confrontation. But those perceived gaps also align with the film's philosophy. Systems don't explain themselves fully. They operate. Ultimately, Mercy lands as a disciplined, morally probing thriller that trusts its audience to engage rather than consume passively. It doesn't shout its warning. It hums it, like the mechanical undertone woven through its sound design. Constant, subtle, unsettling. And that's the final irony. A film about efficiency refuses to rush its message. It builds carefully, controls its tone, delivers its verdict without spectacle. Justice, in this world, moves fast. Reflection takes longer. If Mercy is about institutional automation on the surface, beneath that, it's about psychological erosion. Systems don't just process bodies, they reshape minds. And what the extended final act of this film suggests, especially in retrospect, is that the true battleground isn't the courtroom or the execution chamber. It's perception, control of narrative, control of identity. Watch how the film gradually shifts the locus of tension inward. Early on, the conflict is external: accusation, procedure, countdown, clear stakes, concrete obstacles. But as the narrative progresses, something more unsettling happens. The detective doesn't just fight the system. He begins to internalize it. He starts thinking in procedural terms, calculating odds, speaking in the language of institutional logic even while resisting it. That's the psychological trap. Oppression doesn't always feel like force. Sometimes it feels like adaptation. There's a subtle but powerful moment, easy to overlook, where Pratt's character corrects someone's use of terminology about the execution protocol. Even while facing death, he defaults to precision. That reflex reveals something profound. He hasn't fully separated himself from the machine. He still believes in order, in structure, in the idea that systems, properly understood, can be navigated. But here's the fracture. Understanding a system doesn't mean you can escape it. This is where mercy becomes less about justice and more about control psychology. Institutions function most efficiently when participants believe in them. The film quietly asks, what happens when belief collides with self-preservation? When the very structure that gave your life meaning becomes the instrument of your destruction? Pratt's performance in the final stretch leans into that dissonance. Notice how his tone shifts. Earlier, his arguments are procedural, technical. Later, they become existential. Not the evidence doesn't align, more like this shouldn't be happening. It's subtle. But the language loses its institutional confidence. The erosion of certainty becomes the real tragedy. And then there's the question of surveillance. Throughout the film, glass partitions, elevated camera angles, digital monitoring systems remind us that observation is constant. But psychologically, constant observation changes behavior. You begin performing even when alone. You begin editing yourself. There's a chilling stillness in the later holding scenes. Pratt doesn't pace, doesn't rage. He sits, composed, as if aware he's always being watched. That composure reads not as peace, but conditioning. When a system monitors everything, authenticity becomes risky. This ties into a broader philosophical thread running quietly through the film, the commodification of accountability. In the world of mercy, justice has been optimized into measurable milestones, appeals processed within fixed timeframes, evidence evaluated through algorithmic assistance. Human judgment becomes supplementary rather than central. The film doesn't scream that this is dystopia. It whispers, this is efficient, and efficiency is seductive. That's the genius of its thematic architecture. It doesn't rely on overt authoritarian imagery. It relies on plausibility. The horror isn't that the system is evil. It's that it's functioning exactly as designed. The final act, especially in light of everything that came before, reframes the entire narrative as a study in psychological compression, not just of one man, but of society. How much ambiguity can we tolerate before demanding resolution? How much time are we willing to give doubt? Because speed is comforting, ambiguity is not. And, in a culture increasingly driven by immediacy, instant verdicts on social media, rapid news cycles, algorithmic sorting of truth, the film's warning feels less speculative and more diagnostic. But here's where the analysis deepens. There's another layer beneath institutional critique, masculinity under institutional pressure. Pratt's character begins the film embodying traditional authority, law enforcement, physical presence, procedural command. As that authority is stripped away, what remains? Not brute strength, not swagger, just vulnerability. The system doesn't overpower him physically, it neutralizes him structurally. That inversion dismantles the action, hero archetype in a fascinating way. Strength cannot punch through bureaucracy. Charisma cannot charm an algorithm. In a world governed by automation, traditional cinematic masculinity becomes obsolete, and that may be one of the boldest subversions in the film. No grand monologue about it, no thematic spotlight, just quiet deconstruction. By the time the credits roll, the audience isn't left with a sense of triumph or defeat. They're left with unease, with questions, with a lingering awareness that the system portrayed doesn't require malice to be dangerous. It only requires momentum. And momentum, once built, is hard to stop. But here's the larger cultural ripple. If mercy is diagnosing a society addicted to efficiency, what does that say about the film industry itself? About streaming algorithms? About content optimized for engagement metrics? The meta layer is unavoidable. A movie about automated justice released into an era of automated recommendation systems. That's not coincidence, that's resonance. And resonance is where legacy begins. Because beneath the legal mechanics and emotional restraint lies a deeper fracture, the instability of certainty in an age of data. The film presents a system that appears airtight, evidence digitized, timelines reconstructed algorithmically, probabilities calculated with machine confidence. In theory, this reduces human error. In practice, it introduces a new vulnerability, over-reliance. When numbers look clean, doubt feels inefficient. And that's where the philosophical tension sharpens. Throughout the film, truth is treated as something measurable. Evidence either aligns or it doesn't. Appeals either meet thresholds or they don't. The structure suggests objectivity, but mercy quietly questions whether objectivity without empathy becomes its own distortion. There's a pivotal tonal shift in the third act, not in plot mechanics, but in framing. The narrative stops asking, "Did he do it?" and starts asking, "Does the system care if it's wrong?" That distinction reframes everything, because justice isn't only about outcomes, it's about process, and process without humility calcifies. This is where the film's restraint becomes radical. It refuses to offer an omniscient viewpoint. We're not given divine clarity. Even as revelations unfold, ambiguity lingers at the edges. That choice forces the audience into discomfort. We crave confirmation. The film offers tension instead. Certainty, it suggests, may be the most dangerous luxury of all. And in a culture increasingly governed by predictive systems, credit scoring algorithms, AI moderation tools, risk assessment software, the film's warning feels almost surgical. Data can reveal patterns. It cannot guarantee fairness. Numbers carry authority, but authority doesn't equal morality. What's particularly fascinating is how mercy avoids technophobia. It doesn't depict machines as malevolent. The algorithms don't glitch dramatically. The screens don't flicker ominously. The system works exactly as intended. That's the horror. When harm arises not from malfunction, but from design, accountability becomes abstract. Who do you blame? The coder? The policymaker? The operator following protocol? The public who demanded faster justice? The film never answers directly. It simply layers the question. There's also a subtle interrogation of speed versus wisdom. Throughout the narrative, time is treated as adversary. Deadlines accelerate decisions. Appeals shrink into compressed windows. Characters speak about efficiency like it's progress, but wisdom rarely thrives under countdown pressure. The execution timer becomes more than a plot device. It's a metaphor for cultural impatience. We want closure. We want resolution. We want verdicts quickly, and systems evolve to satisfy that appetite. The detective's arc mirrors this tension. Early in the film, he's a product of that urgency, confident in rapid procedural judgment. As the machine turns toward him, he becomes the embodiment of delayed understanding. He wants time, space, nuance. He wants what the system was never designed to provide. That inversion carries weight beyond the story. It challenges the audience to reflect on their own consumption habits. How quickly do we judge? How eagerly do we accept algorithmic authority? How comfortable are we with unresolved ambiguity? The film doesn't preach. It holds up a mirror. And then there's the existential layer, identity reduced to data. In one particularly resonant thread, the detective's entire life is distilled into files, reports, behavioral patterns. A human being becomes a dataset, complexity flattened into metrics. That reduction is efficient. It's also dehumanizing. The cinematography reinforces this theme repeatedly. Characters framed against screens filled with numerical assessments. The individual dwarfed by analytics. The self reduced to output. If earlier thrillers warned us about surveillance states, Mercy warns about self-surveillance societies, worlds where we internalize evaluation systems so deeply that we begin policing ourselves. That psychological consequence lingers long after plot resolution, and this is where the film's legacy potential crystallizes. As AI integration deepens globally, stories that explore algorithmic governance will only gain relevance. Today, the film feels cautionary. A decade from now, it may feel documentary adjacent. But legacy isn't just about theme, it's about craft endurance. Mercy's disciplined aesthetic-controlled pacing, restrained performance, minimalist design positions it well for long-term reevaluation. Flashy thrillers age quickly. Precision tends to last. When spectacle dates, structure remains. Think of films like Network or The Conversation. Initially timely, later prophetic. They endure because their core anxieties transcend era. Mercy aspires to that territory. It may not reach canonical status immediately, but its questions are built to echo. And here's the final meta layer. The film critiques optimization, while itself being a product of optimized industry systems, streaming analytics, market research, audience targeting. It exists inside the machine it questions. That paradox doesn't weaken it, it strengthens it. Because awareness within structure is more powerful than rebellion outside it. By the end of this extended reflection, Mercy feels less like a thriller about a wrongful accusation and more like a meditation on modern momentum. Systems accelerating, culture accelerating, judgment accelerating, humanity struggling to keep pace. And that may be its most haunting insight, not that justice can fail, but that it can function flawlessly and still miss the point. Legacy isn't built on opening weekends. It's built on reinterpretation. And if Mercy continues to gain traction over time, it will likely be because of how it reframes power, not as domination, but as procedure. Most films about injustice dramatize cruelty. They give us visible antagonists, corrupt officials, overt abuse. That makes anger easy. It makes catharsis possible. Mercy does something more unsettling. It removes the theatrical villain and replaces him with workflow. No one in the system wakes up twirling evil intentions. They check boxes, follow protocol, meet benchmarks. And that quiet normalization of irreversible consequences becomes the film's most enduring critique. Because the scariest systems aren't the ones that scream, they're the ones that hum. This is where the film's long-term cultural value may solidify. As governance systems worldwide increasingly incorporate predictive analytics, risk assessment tools in courtrooms, AI-assisted policing models, automated administrative decisions, the question isn't whether technology will be used. It already is. The question is whether we'll mistake procedural smoothness for ethical integrity. Mercy doesn't condemn innovation. It interrogates complacency. There's a particularly resonant thematic strand in how characters defer responsibility upward. It's policy. It's above my clearance. The algorithm flagged it. Language becomes shield. Accountability diffuses. No single person holds the lever, yet the lever keeps pulling. Diffused responsibility is powerful because it feels clean. No fingerprints, just process. This concept echoes sociological studies about bureaucratic harm. The idea that systemic damage often occurs not through individual malice, but through distributed compliance. The film dramatizes that theory without turning into lecture. You feel it through interactions, through pauses, through the sterile rhythm of decision-making. And here's the twist that makes it linger. Even after the narrative resolves, the system remains. Maybe shaken, maybe questioned, but intact. The film resists fantasy of total dismantling. That restraint gives it weight. Real systems don't collapse overnight because of one exposed flaw. They adjust, they refine, they continue. That realism elevates Mercy beyond genre thriller into quiet social commentary. It also deepens its rewatch potential. On second viewing, the film plays less like a suspense narrative and more like a procedural autopsy. You begin noticing the small compliance cues, the glances between officials, the micro moments where doubt flickers but action continues anyway. The audience becomes complicit observer. And complicity is uncomfortable. There's also a broader commentary on trust embedded here. Modern society depends on trust in invisible systems, banking networks, digital infrastructure, algorithmic sorting mechanisms. We rarely see their inner workings. We trust their output. Mercy visualizes that invisible trust structure and asks what happens when trust is misplaced, not through conspiracy, but through design limits. The detective's arc ultimately becomes symbolic of societal awakening. He begins as believer, ends as questioner. That trajectory mirrors what many institutions experience historically: initial faith in efficiency, followed by reckoning when edge cases expose blind spots. But the film resists turning him into revolutionary martyr. He isn't a system destroyer. He's a human caught in gears. And that distinction keeps the story grounded. In terms of cinematic legacy, Mercy may find its strongest foothold not in awards lists, but in academic discourse. Law schools discussing automation, ethics panels examining AI governance, film studies programs exploring post-2020 techno-realism and thrillers. Its value may expand in classrooms before it expands in pop culture nostalgia cycles. And then there's the industry reflection. Hollywood itself is navigating automation, AI-assisted script coverage, algorithm-driven greenlighting, predictive audience analytics. A film critiquing automated justice released during an era of automated storytelling metrics creates a subtle meta-commentary. The system telling this story is itself becoming more procedural. Art questioning process from within process. That recursive layer ensures the film won't fade quickly, because even if box office memory softens, the questions remain relevant. How much control are we willing to outsource? When does optimization become dehumanization? What does mercy look like in a world governed by metrics? And perhaps the most haunting question of all. If the system works exactly as designed and harm still occurs, is that failure or is that clarity? That ambiguity cements Mercy as a film less concerned with providing answers than with destabilizing assumptions. It doesn't demand outrage, it demands reflection. And reflection is slower than reaction, which brings us to the final extension of this analysis. Not what the film says, not how it performs, but how it might be remembered, because the difference between relevance and legacy is time. And time, ironically, is the one resource the characters in Mercy never had enough of. If Mercy endures, it won't be because of shock value. It will endure because of timing. Some films capture a moment. Others anticipate. 1. Mercy exists in that uneasy middle space. It feels contemporary, yet slightly ahead of the curve. And history has a way of revisiting those films when reality inches closer to their warnings. Think about how the conversation gained renewed relevance in the age of digital surveillance, or how Network felt almost prophetic once media ecosystems became algorithmically driven outrage machines. Those films didn't explode because of spectacle. They endured because the world caught up to them. Mercy operates in that lineage. Its central anxiety automation overtaking deliberation isn't science fiction, it's trajectory. Court systems are already experimenting with algorithmic risk assessments. AI tools assist in evidence sorting. Administrative processes across industries are being streamlined through machine learning. The film simply extends the logic. And that's why its restraint matters. If it had leaned into exaggerated dystopia, it would age as fantasy. Instead, it leans into plausibility. Clean interfaces. Measured tones. Policy-driven language. The kind of future that looks like a software update rather than a revolution. Software updates rarely feel dangerous, until they are. Culturally, the film may become a reference point in discussions about techno-governance ethics, not because it screams, but because it models consequences without melodrama. It shows how harm can occur without villainy, how momentum can override doubt, how systems can be both rational and unjust simultaneously. That paradox gives the film philosophical weight. There's also an evolving conversation around masculinity in procedural systems, and Mercy contributes to it quietly. Pratt's character begins as authority embodied, law enforcement confidence, physical assurance, command presence. As the system closes in, that traditional power dissolves. He cannot overpower policy. He cannot negotiate with automation through charisma. Strength becomes irrelevant. What remains is vulnerability, reflection, the capacity to question. In a genre often dominated by physical resistance, that shift feels quietly radical. From an industry standpoint, Mercy may also represent a pivot in star vehicles. In previous decades, a major star thriller might hinge on explosive set pieces. Here, the spectacle is minimal. The draw is thematic gravity and performance nuance. If this model proves sustainable, it signals that audiences still have appetite for adult-oriented tension that trusts intelligence over noise. And then, there's the streaming era factor. As films increasingly live long after theatrical release, discovery patterns change. A viewer stumbling upon Mercy years later, after headlines about AI sentencing tools or automated governance controversies, may experience it differently than opening weekend audiences did. Context reshapes interpretation. Legacy is often retroactive. The final image of the film controlled, ambiguous, restrained, doesn't offer moral comfort. It offers space. Space to think. Space to question. Space to sit with unresolved tension. That's risky. But unresolved tension lingers longer than tidy closure. If there's a critique to be made about Mercy, it's that its emotional temperature occasionally risks alienating viewers who crave catharsis. The film doesn't give you the explosive courtroom reversal or triumphant takedown some might expect. It chooses plausibility over fantasy. For some, that restraint reads as power. For others, distance. But distance can age into gravitas. Films initially labeled cold sometimes mature into precise in retrospect. Tone perception shifts over time. And perhaps the film's most ironic contribution to cinematic discourse is this. It argues for the value of slowing down inside a medium increasingly pressured to accelerate. Faster cuts, shorter attention spans, algorithmically optimized storytelling beats. Mercy resists that pressure. It stretches silence. It holds on faces. It lets discomfort breathe. In a landscape obsessed with pace, it dares to pause. Which brings us to the final layer of this extended analysis. Not the film's warning, not its cultural positioning, but its ultimate artistic statement. What does Mercy believe? Not about systems, not about technology, but about humanity. Because beneath all the procedural critique, beneath all the institutional dread, there is one quiet assertion threaded through the film. That doubt is not weakness. It is mercy. And doubt cannot be automated. In the end, Mercy leaves us with something far more unsettling than a verdict. It leaves us with a choice, not the characters, ours. Because after 17 layers of analysis, craft, performance, philosophy, industry context, we arrive at the simplest and most dangerous idea the film proposes. Systems reflect the values of the people who build and tolerate them. Automation is not inherently cruel. Efficiency is not inherently unjust. But when speed becomes the highest virtue, mercy becomes expendable. And that's the quiet thesis humming beneath everything. The final stretch of Mercy doesn't roar. It settles. It understands that the most profound films don't demand applause. They demand introspection. By refusing explosive catharsis, the film mirrors its own critique. No dramatic system collapse, no triumphant dismantling, just consequence, just continuation, just the uneasy awareness that reform is slower than execution. That artistic restraint becomes its boldest statement. Because cinema has conditioned us to expect the righteous disruption of corrupt systems, the whistleblower wins. The wrongfully accused is vindicated in spectacle. The machine explodes in sparks and symbolism. Mercy denies that fantasy. It implies that systems are harder to uproot than individuals are to process, and that realism lingers. There's a moment subtle, almost throwaway, where a procedural announcement continues in the background even as emotional stakes peak. It's easy to miss, but that overlap says everything. The system doesn't pause for human drama. It continues its sequence. That's the point. Humanity is messy. Systems are neat. When neatness becomes priority, humanity must fight for space. Artistically, the film's commitment to cohesion elevates it beyond its genre frame. Production design, cinematography, sound, performance, all operate under the same philosophy: control. Nothing is indulgent. Nothing screams for attention. Even the most intense scenes are executed with surgical calm. The movie practices what it preaches, and in doing so, it creates a rare kind of tension, the kind that doesn't dissipate when the credits roll. Instead, it follows you home. You start noticing headlines differently, court cases involving AI-assisted judgments, automated moderation systems misclassifying context, bureaucratic delays framed as optimization. The film doesn't feel exaggerated anymore. It feels adjacent. That adjacency is legacy fuel. Within Chris Pratt's career, Mercy may not be his highest-grossing project. It may not define his commercial peak. But it could very well mark the moment audiences began taking him seriously as a dramatic anchor outside franchise spectacle. The performance doesn't rely on charm. It relies on containment, on quiet deterioration, on the willingness to let doubt show. For Timur Bekmambetov, the film represents evolution, a director known for stylistic boldness stepping into tonal discipline. The absence of visual excess becomes the artistic flex. He proves he can generate anxiety without spectacle. Restraint becomes power. And culturally, Mercy plants a flag in a conversation that will only grow louder. How much moral authority are we willing to delegate to systems designed for speed? The film doesn't reject progress. It asks for pause. It asks for friction. It asks for the uncomfortable space where doubt can exist long enough to matter. Because mercy, in its purest form, is the willingness to hesitate, to reconsider, to allow complexity to breathe before consequence becomes irreversible. That idea feels almost rebellious in an era built on instant reactions and accelerated judgments. And maybe that's why mercy feels necessary. Not because it delivers spectacle, not because it offers easy resolution, but because it slows us down. It forces us to sit inside procedural inevitability and feel its weight. In a cinematic landscape crowded with noise, that silence is daring. So what is the final verdict? Mercy is a disciplined, morally provocative thriller that trades bombast for introspection. It may not satisfy viewers seeking explosive catharsis, but for those willing to engage with its restraint, it offers something rarer, sustained ethical tension. It's not perfect. Its emotional distance may frustrate some. Its refusal to handhold may alienate others. But its cohesion, thematic relevance, and career-shifting performance anchor it as a film built to age thoughtfully rather than loudly. Justice in the film moves quickly. Understanding does not. And maybe that's the lasting message. In a world accelerating toward optimization, the bravest act might not be resistance. It might be hesitation, it might be doubt, it might be mercy.